Since he was a little kid, Soichiro has been losing his loved ones. His mother died when she gave birth to him, and his father died when he turned 17. To feel less lonely, when Soichiro found an abandoned cat, he adopted him and named him Pete. Shortly afterward, Soichiro was adopted by his father's friend and inventor Professor Koichi, who had a daughter named Riko. For the next few years, Soichiro studied electronics with Koichi to become an inventor like him, but tragedy soon struck again. Koichi and his wife died in a plane crash. Koichi was old enough to go to college, but Riko was still a middle school kid, so she was taken in by her uncle Kazuto. It's now March 1, 1995, and Soichiro lives alone with Pete while working on inventing the first prototype of an AI robot, which he codenames A1. He can do all this thanks to the resources given by Kazuto's company FWE, of which Soichiro owns half the shares left to him by Koichi, although he isn't a fan of the fact Kazuto has put his picture on TV to announce the news about the robot project. Whenever it starts to snow, Pete begins meowing, asking Soichiro to find him a door that will take him to summer. Riko visits often too, especially lately, because in a few weeks she'll be moving to a school dorm in another city. She likes watching Soichiro work and is proud of him for not abandoning Koichi's plasma battery project. One evening, Soichiro is visited by Rin, his girlfriend who also happens to be Kazuto's assistant. Riko didn't know about their relationship and learns about it at that moment, which makes her extremely jealous and prompts her to leave in a rush. Pete isn't happy to see Rin either, and he hisses at her as soon as she enters the house. After Riko is gone, Soichiro proceeds to look at the papers Rin's brought because he wants to give Rin half of his company shares. It had been Kazuto's idea, but Soichiro agrees it's for the best and signs without hesitation. A few days later on March 8, Soichiro visits Kazuto at the company, catching him in the middle of getting the shots for his diabetes. Kazuto calls Rin over to have a shareholders meeting, during which he announces their new business plan. They'll release A1 as soon as possible. Soichiro protests against this, explaining A1 isn't ready yet, but Kazuto also announces he won't give him any more money for further models since selling A1 to the Mannix company will give them more capital. When Soichiro continues to protest, Rin proposes a vote, and to Soichiro's shock, she votes in favor of selling A1 like Kazuto does. It turns out she's actually been dating Kazuto all along and playing the role of Soichiro's girlfriend had been a trick to take over the company. Then Kazuto informs that while Soichiro will still be a shareholder, he'll have to terminate all his connections with the company and return all the equipment. Worried about his precious experiments, Soichiro rushes back to his house, but by the time he gets there it's too late. An FWE truck is leaving with absolutely everything. Moments later, Riko comes to visit Soichiro, only to find him crying and getting drunk while cleaning up the place. She wants to know if Kazuto did this, but Soichiro only blames himself because he's destined to lose everything he cares about. Desperate to make him feel better, Riko hugs Soichiro and informs him she won't move to the school dorms. She'll stay here to take care of him because she's always loved him. Soichiro is touched by her gesture but turns her down because she's too young. In tears, Riko accuses Soichiro of giving up before she leaves. Soichiro notices she left her Walkman behind, but he doesn't have the heart to go after her and keeps it in his pocket. He also finds some flyers promoting cryogenic sleep, and he decides that's the best solution to his troubles. Once he makes it to the cryogenic sleep company, he confirms Pete can be put to sleep with him, choosing a period of 30 years and making sure to sign some extra papers so that Riko will get his company shares when she turns 20. Soichiro wants to start immediately, but when the doctors do a quick checkup, they discover he's drunk and refuse to proceed. He has to return when he's sober to make the decision with a clear mind. Soichiro follows the doctor's advice and while thinking about his options, he remembers all the good times he had with Riko, making him understand that running away isn't a solution. Meanwhile, Riko returns home and overhears Kazuto and Rin talking about their plans for Soichiro's creations. Thus she rushes upstairs to try to warn him, but calling him only gets her the voicemail. Kazuto finds her on the phone and Riko pretends she's been talking to a friend before leaving, but as soon as she's gone, Kazuto uses the redial button and realizes she's going to warn Soichiro. At the same time, Rin gets a call from Soichiro asking her to talk, so Rin tells him to come over before sending Kazuto after Riko. When Soichiro arrives at the house, he asks Rin to drop the plan or he'll take his story to the press and ruin the company's reputation. Rin pretends to agree to distract Soichiro and put him to sleep with an injection, but when she opens his bag, she accidentally releases Pete, who attacks Rin before running away. A crashing noise alerts Pete that a window has been broken and he uses it to escape, allowing him to return to Soichiro's truck which mysteriously drives away. Afterward, Rin finds the cryogenic sleep paperwork in Soichiro's bag and gets an idea. Since she knows people in the company that owe her a favor for her help with tax evasion, she convinces them to put Soichiro to sleep, effectively getting rid of him. In the meantime, Riko arrives at Soichiro's house, only to be caught like a deer in the headlights. 30 years pass and it's now 2025. Soichiro is awoken from his cryogenic sleep by the company's new doctors and once he realizes he's in the future, he asks about Pete. However, when the doctor calls him over, the Pete that shows up turns out to be a robot. The cat never made it with him. This Pete is a robot nurse that'll watch over Soichiro for the next 5 days, which is the time the patients must stay in the company's clinic to check the cryogenic sleep didn't hurt them. A lawyer also visits Soichiro to tell him about the situation with his assets. It turns out Manix, the company that bought A1, went bankrupt, so Soichiro has nothing under his name. Riko has also been calling to check on him and left an address where he could find her. Desperate to see Riko, Soichiro waits until morning when he's left alone to escape the building before his 5 days are over, noticing that there are working robots everywhere and all street signs are digital. The only things in his pocket are Riko's Walkman and his wallet, meaning he at least has some cash, yet he can't find a cab. Pete suddenly appears next to him and explains apps are used to get cabs, and he calls for one on his phone. Soichiro's surprised to see that the car drives itself before Pete grabs his wallet and throws it away, replacing it with a cell phone as he explains all payments are done through apps now and the cryogenic sleep insurance policy has granted him some basic funds. Moments later, they make it to Riko's apartment, which is in a sorry state. When they go deep inside they find out it's not Riko who has been calling but Rin, who in 30 years has gained a lot of weight and used Riko's name to lure Soichiro to her place. Rin explains that the year after Soichiro fell asleep Kazuto got sick and died of a complication with his diabetes. The company was taken over, and Rin was caught evading taxes, for which she served some time in prison. She blames Soichiro for all of it, thinking he planned it all because a man showed up with the ownership of his shares to take over the company. Soichiro is confused by this since his shares were supposed to go to Riko, prompting Rin to tell him Riko is missing and that she probably died the night he went to sleep because his house exploded. Refusing to believe this, Soichiro goes to the cemetery and confirms there's a grave under Riko's name. To deal with his grief, he listens to Riko's favorite songs on her Walkman and remembers all the times she told him not to give up. It's then that Soichiro decides to be more like Pete the cat and look for the right door. Pete the robot accepts to help, reminding Soichiro he must serve him for 5 days and there are 4 left. The first step is to go to the library to find out more information, and that's how they learn that FWE was bought by Guardian Manufacturing, a company with almost no business before this. Suddenly, Pete announces it's time for him to enter sleep mode, which he needs to do 3 hours a day to recharge. When Soichiro checks his programming out to understand him better, he discovers there's a plasma battery in his back, but Pete isn't a design from FWE or Guardian. He was made by a company called Aladdin and his model is Pete 13. The next morning, they go to FWE's old building, now belonging to Guardian. The robot receptionist doesn't find Soichiro's data in the system and refuses to allow him in until she suddenly receives orders to make an exception. When they make it to the top floor, they meet Gota, the company owner who is incredibly excited to see Soichiro. After promising to help him find some information about the whole deal with the shares, Gota explains Soichiro was the one to finish the plasma battery but for some reason he gave the exclusive rights to Aladdin. He also swears he met Soichiro as a child and he was his inspiration to open this company. He even got Soichiro's signature on a robotics magazine. That day in a restaurant, Soichiro arrived to see Professor Toy, who was arrested for embezzling research funds from the university to work on a so-called time machine. However, Soichiro never did any of this, which means someone must be using his identity. A few hours later, Gota manages to find the old FWE records, where they learn that Soichiro's shares went to a guy called Taro Sato, the founder of Aladdin, and when they look at the patent behind the Pete 1 model, they're shocked to discover is under Soichiro's name as it should be instead of the company Kazuto wanted to sell to. The patent attorney behind this was also Taro Sato, and more surprisingly, the designer behind Pete 2 was Riko, but using the Sato surname instead of her own. Putting all the clues together, Soichiro finally realizes what's going on and drags Pete to visit Professor Toy, who has been waiting 30 years for Soichiro to show up. His time machine is finished, and this confirms Soichiro's theory. The mastermind behind this whole plan has always been himself, meaning this is a rewritten future. Toy gives Soichiro a bunch of gold bars to take with him to the past to fund his research and asks him to finish the plasma battery because it's the only thing that can make the time machine work now. Before leaving, Soichiro says goodbye to Pete and gives him Riko's Walkman to take care of, but since he still has a day of service left, Pete leaves the Walkman behind and jumps into the machine so he can travel to the past too. The pair returns to 1995 and land in the middle of the road, where they're saved by a mysterious driver, who turns out to be Taro Sato himself. Taro recognizes Soichiro from the news and takes him to his home, where he lives with his disabled wife Midori. When Soichiro wakes up, Taro explains Pete's told him everything so he's already got the plan going. He's cashed all the gold bars and put the money in his account. He's also gotten all the materials necessary for research in a room upstairs. He accepts to become his patent attorney and his pay will come from the gold cash, a deal Soichiro doesn't hesitate to sign for. It is now February 28th, and the scam happens on March 8th, so Soichiro has around a week to finish designing A1 in the battery, but first, he needs to visit Toy. Just like CEO Gota had explained, Soichiro finds the professor in a restaurant, and he's wary of him until a younger Gota recognizes Soichiro from the news. Then Professor Toy is willing to accept the money to finish his research. Before leaving, Soichiro signs Goda's magazine as expected and tells him he'll be a great inventor someday. Afterward, Soichiro works hard on finishing A1, which he renames Pete 1 after his cat. He also asks Taro for a few things: to expose Rin for her tax evasion, to file the patents under a new company of his own that they'll call Aladdin, and to consider the idea of adopting a kid since Midori lost her ability to get pregnant after the accident that put her in a wheelchair. When March 8th finally comes, Soichiro still needs to finish some final designs, so Pete uses his super speed and strength to start the plan. While the Soichiro of this time goes through the meeting, Pete runs after the FWE truck to stop it and recovers all of Soichiro's things that were taken from the house. Night falls by the time future Soichiro finishes his designs, allowing him to run to Kazuto's house and watch Rin get scratched by Pete the cat. It's future Soichiro who breaks the window for Pete to come out and who takes the truck away together with the cat, driving all the way to his house to find Riko before Kazuto does. After hugging Riko tightly and apologizing to her, Soichiro hands her Pete before getting into his truck and crashing it against the house. Using the vehicle's leaking and the documents that were supposed to give the shares to Riko, Soichiro starts a fire, then he opens a few gas canisters to make the house explode as history demands. On his way out, he recovers a family picture to gift Riko while telling her everything about the future. Pete shows up in the FWE truck and picks them up to drive them to Sato's house, where he and Midori adopt Riko as their new daughter. Soichiro also leaves all the stuff in the truck to Sato to give to Goto when he buys FWE. Now it's time for this Soichiro to also get into cryogenic sleep and keep the timeline intact, so he takes Pete the cat with him after saying goodbye to Riko, encouraging her to keep on studying and become someone great. Pete the robot decides to stay in this year to keep Riko company, that way they can wait for Soichiro to wake up together. Soichiro manages to get a place in the cryogenic sleep chambers by pretending to be present Soichiro, who is being put away by Rin in secret. 30 years later, he wakes up again, and the Pete that waited all these years brings the cat to him, since the pet survived the cryogenic sleep as well. When Soichiro asks about Riko, he learns she went to school and became an inventor like him. Then she worked at Aladdin and helped with the development of the plasma battery and the new Pete models. He also learns that 10 years after the release of Pete 2, Riko chose to go into cryogenic sleep too, and she'll wake up soon. Soichiro rushes to her room to hold her hand and welcome her into the future. Now that she's of age, they can be together like she's always wanted. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.